The music's on, the disco ball has dropped, and it's time to get this party started. You're listening to episode 5 of DiscoTrek, a Star Trek Discovery After Party podcast here on the Tricorder Transmissions Network. I'm your host, Heather Barker, and with me at the turntable, as always, is my co-host, the one and only Jeff Hewlett. Jeff, how are you doing?
I'm doing really, really well tonight, Heather, but I'm a little bit disappointed that we won't be able to drop any F-bombs tonight because there were no F-bombs on Discovery this week.
Big surprise. I had a feeling that might happen. I don't think we're going to get a lot of those this week.
No.
So let's move past all of that drama and move into talking about what I felt was a really great episode. For those who aren't familiar with the podcast, we're a community-based Star Trek discotheque of sorts, focusing on each episode of Star Trek Discovery as they air. Tonight, we'll be discussing episode 6, called Lethe. With us to talk about the episode are 2 members of the unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas convention group on Facebook, which is the exclusive gateway to gain admission onto the show. Our first guest is a good friend of ours who we met at STLV. He won one of our bingo challenges. I don't remember which. Did you win first place, William?
Yes, I got first place and I took the fan sets, which was awesome because I love fan sets and their pins.
That is totally awesome. So William Conlin, our great friend, who is also nice enough, by the way, to buy pins with that prize money for his friends.
Yes.
So we were really thrilled to see you do that. But welcome to the show. We're excited to talk about Discovery.
Excited to be here.
Our next guest is another member of the convention group, and that is Tommy Burkhalter. Hi, Tommy. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Heather. I'm glad to be here.
We're glad to have you. This is I really love this episode of Discovery, so I'm excited to get to the discussion. But first, we have a little bit of housekeeping to do. We're going to hop into our discussion in just a minute, but I wanted to go over how the show works. So DiscoTrek is community-focused and evolved from our desire to give fans in our convention community a way to talk about Discovery. So what you need to do to enter is make sure you're a member of the unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas convention group on Facebook. Once you do that, we make a post every Tuesday with the DiscoTrek image and information on the following Monday's recording time, as it does change a little bit. Comment on that post to be entered, and then the following Saturday, we'll use a random generator to pick 2 winners. Once you've been on the podcast, you can't come back on again, but there are ways to be a part of the discussion. Jeff, do you want to tell people how?
Sure. So we'll make an additional post on the Sunday prior to the episode asking for your comments that we might use at the end of an episode of DiscoTrek. So you can also, if you want to, you can call into the show and leave a up to 2-minute voicemail by calling 609-512-LLAP. That's 5527. So 609-512-5527 for a chance for your message to be played on the show.
Alrighty. And we do have a Patreon that keeps us going. Jeff, do you want to tell people a little bit about that?
Sure, you can find our Patreon at patreon.com/the-tricorder-transmissions or by visiting our website, thetricordertransmissions.com or shoreleavepodcast.com and clicking the big Patreon link on the right-hand side of the screen. So if you like what we're doing here on DiscoTrek or any of our other Tricorder shows, please think about joining our other patrons who've also graciously given of themselves to be part of our network. So becoming a patron will also give you an instant access to our unedited episodes that go live right after we're done recording them, often with some bonus material either before or after the show. So for instance, this show that we're recording right now will be available for our patrons later tonight, right as soon as we're done recording it. And I'm happy to say, a little shout out here to our really good friend, John Krikorian, for becoming our newest patron on Patreon. Thanks so much, John. You're awesome. Thanks for being a great friend and member of our Trek family.
Yeah, absolutely. We will always remember your donation of those yummy cupcakes at our Tricorder birthday party back at STLV. So I heard a rumor that we've got another show popping onto the Tricorder Transmissions Network.
Oh my God, Heather. Yes, I'm so excited about this. We have a pretty big announcement here at the Tricorder Transmissions. In the next few weeks, a brand new show will be hitting our network called Politics with our new hosts Barry DeFord and Shashank Avaru. Stay tuned at the end of this episode to learn more about that new show from Barry and Shashank themselves. I'm really, really looking forward for this first episode to hit the airwaves here in a couple weeks, Heather.
Yeah, it's great to see the network grow, and we're very happy that these are some of our STLV friends. Well, our family, I guess. So
Yeah,
it's exciting. We've had a lot of great additions in the past couple years, so it's a great time to be a part of Tricorder Transmissions.
absolutely right. And I love that more shows are coming out of STLV. It's just seems like the nexus of shows for us.
Definitely. All right. Well, let's go ahead and move into discovery discussion. Please keep in mind that from this point forward, there will be spoilers. There may be fan theory. So just keep that in mind. If you haven't watched the episode, you want to stop here, go watch it, and return. Quick breakdown of the show. This is a general discussion about the episode, but it is segmented into three parts. First is Drop the Record, where we talk about our reactions and opening remarks to the episode. Play a New Track comes up next. That's where we explore what we learned that's new about the Star Trek universe. And Spin It Again is our look back at standout moments, scenes, characters, anything you feel is worth a second glance. All right, so let's get this party started. Let's go ahead and drop the record. So, I wanted to take a quick minute and just talk about the title of this episode because, first of all, I didn't know how to pronounce it. I had to go onto Google and have it pronounce it for me. So, Lethe is a river in Hades whose waters cause drinkers to forget their past. It's also the name of a character in TOS's Dagger of the Mind, whose mind was wiped by a neural neutralizer. So, to me, this kind of foreshadows some of that fan theory that was going on with Lieutenant Ash Tyler. William, do you have any quick thoughts about whether that may play in here?
Well, the minute you said that there was a possibility of fan theories, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to start talking eventually because I am totally subscribing to the Ash's Vok theory. There were like so many moments in this episode that immediately drew me to that conclusion too. When Lorca says you fight like a Klingon, when
Yep.
he says to Burnham, that's part of being human. I mean, that's such an overt thing for him to say.
Yeah, those are little highlights that I picked out as well. I think Lorca was like, I need someone I can trust, someone that understands war, what it takes to survive, what it takes to win. And I'm just like, if this turns out to be true, oh, the irony here. Oh, what, Jeff?
No, let Tommy go. Let Tommy go first. He's the guest. I can hold my tongue.
I mean, I don't like to read the fan theories. I think that the writers are doing such a good job that I'm enjoying watching it as it comes to me. But I have, paid a lot of attention to the Ash fan theories, and he's conveniently never around Lorca's tribble that would tip us. Until that happens, I'm keeping an open mind. But I do think it's possible just the way he was cast originally as a Klingon, and now he's playing a Starfleet officer, and some of it sounds a little too convenient, but the tribble will be the test.
Yeah,
That's a good point.
All right, Jeff, lay it down.
Oh man, I was gonna save this for later, but since we're getting into this now, I watched this with my what I'm calling my Tyler is Vogue lens on, and I picked out a few moments that I'm gonna throw out. I think I'm gonna set myself up until this comes to pass. If it becomes true, I'm going to set myself up as the person who's going to argue against it because it's fun to point these things out. But if this is true, Lorca checks into his history and everything seemingly checks out. So that means either if Tyler is Vogue assumed an existing identity of someone who already died, aka Ash Tyler, or someone has altered or added Starfleet records that were good enough to fool Lorca into believing that this is a real guy. So I think that, I don't know, I wanted to believe that maybe Lorca is suspicious, but I don't know if his trust in him is genuine or not. He's just trying to keep him as close as he can to keep an eye on him. Not entirely sure, but it just seemed very convenient to me that all of those records kind of lined up if he really was a Klingon impersonating a Starfleet officer. Got a few more. So on the shuttle, when Burnham first, when he insists that she be pulled out of the mind meld the first time, you know, thinking back to Lorca's warning that if she didn't come back unharmed, don't bother coming back at all. I find it fascinating if Voq really is a human in disguise, that he would not have immediately turned that ship around, realizing that if something did happen to her, that would blow his entire mission. It seems really weird to me that if that was his number one goal, to infiltrate Discovery, that he would have taken the risk to let Burnham go back into that mind meld, the chance that something could have happened to her and she could have died. That would have blown everything completely out for him. So it seems really strange to me that if that was his mission, that he would make that decision. But I guess you could probably make a counter argument.
Could I make one?
Sure, go for it.
Given the title of the episode, Lethe also translates to oblivious, so he may be a Manchurian candidate. He may not even know who he is.
Potentially good. Yeah, it's a good one. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Actually, I have my own theory too at the end of this. But I have one more thing I want to throw out there.
Oh gosh. Okay.
So also in the shuttle, let's take a look at the speech that he gives to Burnham about being on the edge of death and thinking about compassionate things, and the things that he would have changed, or people that he loved. And it seemed really compassionate and insightful. And for someone who loathes humans and considers me, it seems to me that that would be really hard for him to fake. That kind of concern, that level of empathy. It seems like he would have to be an incredibly good actor. I like the Manchurian Candidate argument, but my own thought is coming towards the end of the episode when we have that kind of heartfelt reintroduction between Burnham and Tyler. It makes me wonder if maybe he does know who he is, but maybe his relationships that he's building with these humans will eventually make him consider becoming the peacemaker and changing his mind. Maybe transforming into a human and living amongst them and forging these relationships will be enough to prove to him that humans aren't the horrible, evil creatures that Klingons believed them to be. Maybe he'll be the voice for peace.
But also, Burnham killed his cult leader. So I would think he seems to be a true believer. So I would think he would be really, I was going to say a bad word, really mad at her about that, and not being as compassionate as he is being to her, unless he's really, deeply undercover and can suppress all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really the question, is we don't know, because supposedly, we had 3 weeks between when he was Voq and then when we see Ash Tyler. I think everybody's kind of gathered that if he is Voq, this whole 7 months on the prison ship was not true. So there's a lot of question about how quickly something could have happened, whether his memory was wiped and this new memory was put into him, etc. I don't doubt the ability of L'Rell and her people to be able to hack in and add information, because they were able to find Lorca, that on that shuttle to abduct him to begin with. And there was some question there about how that happens. I like the theory, and I think that there's a lot there that definitely suggests a reality. However, there are a lot of people who think it's too clear, kind of like the same thing with Section 31. Well, if it was Section 31, why is the ship 1031, and why are there black badges, etc. on the same tone? Why is there all this dialogue that's suggestive or ironic, or however you want to put it? Regardless, I don't want to spend too much time talking about it. It was definitely interesting. I found it a little shocking that Lorca put him in charge of security, someone that he really doesn't know all that well. So again, there's a question of whether Lorca is doing this because he sees something in this guy and actually trusts him, or whether he's doing it to keep him close. We can speculate on that down the road when we talk about Lorca, maybe. I guess let's just talk about general reactions to the episode and not so much focused on Voq Tyler. Tommy, how did you feel about this episode overall?
I thought it was a great episode with great character moments. It was the second episode in a row that I felt myself crying a little during it. and I think it's because of the characters, and I think also because I'm just so thankful to have Star Trek back on TV and like episodes to look forward to. As a matter of fact, I mean, just quickly, this was the first one I was not able to watch as it dropped. I just watched it a few hours ago. My partner works on The Walking Dead, and their premiere was last night, and they did a 100th episode special of the after show, The Talking Dead. And I'm only bringing this up because Sonequa Martin Green made a live appearance. She came on stage with the rest of her castmates, and she was just so graceful and just so grateful to be on Star Trek. And Chris Hardwick, that hosts that show, said, I thought, when Sasha died, you probably thought you were getting out of having to go to Comic-Con, but you'll be going the rest of your and she's like, yeah, this opportunity is for her and how much she appreciates it. So I just wanted to add that. And other than that, I thought it was great. We learned more about Sarek and Burnham's relationship. Stamets seems to be high as a kite from his mushrooms. And Jason Isaacs, already doing some shirtless scenes. So, it was a great episode.
So I'm going to pull something out of that really quickly because I don't know that we'll talk about him a ton in this episode. But the last episode, Choose Your Pain, ended with that fun that mirror version of Stamets. And so I think a lot of us were like, oh, well, are we going to see something in the next episode? And we really didn't see anything quite related to that. But we do see a very different Stamets.
I think we might have, but we just don't know it.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we might be seeing Mirror Stamets, to be honest with you. I just don't know if he knows he's Mirror Stamets.
Yeah, did anybody else get a enemy within kind of vibe out of that?
Hell yes, I did. Yeah. Absolutely did. It felt to me like this was the polar opposite of the Stamets we saw when we first met him a few episodes back.
Well, yeah, and that's what I'm saying, is that it's a very different one. I'm still not convinced in the camp that it's actually a mirror version, but I definitely think that there's something going on.
I agree with you, Heather. I'm not sure that it's a mirror thing, but there's definitely something with obviously his reflection is like moving on its own. So there's obviously something going on, but, I'm not sure it's mirror related either. And one more thing about him, we did see the Discovery do a spore jump, but we didn't really see how they did it. So I don't know if Stamets is, going into the chamber every time, or if it was a short enough jump that they didn't have to have him interact with the spore drive or what. So I guess there's a lot of questions to come for that.
Yeah. He made that comment like once you get used to the pain, it's fine or whatever. Yeah, the needles, it's fine. So I kind of did assume that he's continuing to do the jumps.
I missed that.
But it definitely was a very different Stamets. And I agree with you, Jeff, that it's a totally different person than who we saw in the first few episodes. I would argue that he started to become that person over the course of these 5 episodes. But we're definitely seeing something, he's like, yeah, groovy, which I thought was kind of fun.
Yeah,
given it's DiscoTrek. But I thought it was interesting. He's like, so you're talking about building a synthetic mind meld augment. So not only do we have a mind meld reference, which is pertinent to the show, but then again, another reference to augment, which again, I did these references with augments and eugenic manipulation, eugenic engineering still kind of plays into this whole possibility of Tyler and what's going on there.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So William, what was your general reaction?
Everything that's already been said. I loved the episode. I actually watched it twice last night because I thought there was just so much to process and so much to get through. One of the reactions I had from it is I feel like Trek purists are not going to be happy with it because there's like so many things in there that they're not going to like. But I overall loved it. I'm not a Trek purist, so
what do you think? What do you think was controversial?
Well, I think having a holodeck on Discovery is certainly something that people are going to freak out about. But for me, I've always prescribed to there are TV shows that have what's called a state of perpetual now, like The Simpsons, how Lisa and Bart have never aged. And then there's movies, franchises like James Bond, where the technology changes, but you've always got your secret agent is the same age. He doesn't, change at all. Everything changes around him. So I like to think of Star Trek as living in like perpetual future. They could not have predicted things like the holodeck in 1966, whereas now we're not that far off from that kind of stuff with VR. So we have to kind of stay in this state of, what is the next thing? So that's how I justify it in my mind.
I'm interested to see, because we did see the holodeck for the first time in the animated series, and we've had quite a few connections with the animated series in Discovery already. So I'm curious if there's a connection. I mean, I had the understanding that it wasn't necessarily a holodeck, but a holographic simulation. And we've got holographic technology that we've talked about on the ship that obviously disappears at some point.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to assume that somewhere along the line we're going to get an explanation of why that technology disappears. I was certainly like, oh wow, okay, what's going on, and this is kind of cool.
Well, I applaud the set designers for going over and above and making that set look really awesome, and not just going for the old black and white grid holodeck room. They actually made it look really interesting and high tech. With the emitters kind of in those arc formations above their heads in that kind of a circular room. I thought that was a really, really cool set design.
Yeah, totally. The other thing is just this continued long-distance Katra call, as I like to call it. They're just kind of inventing new stuff. And I know they said at the panels in Vegas that they would be, tweaking with the canon a little bit. And that's totally cool with me. I just, wonder how much leeway the diehards are going to give.
A lot, I'm sure. Although most of what I've seen hasn't really been coherent. It's less bitching about specific things and more just saying that they're not following canon and not really giving examples, which I tend to just disregard that kind of stuff. We're all open to constructive criticism, right? That's what I really like about our podcast allows for 4 different people, so 4 different viewpoints. We've been pretty lucky that for the most part, our reactions have all been overly positive. Mm-hmm. But there is potential to have someone on who doesn't like the show, and we'll deal with that when that comes. But my goal is that discussion always be constructive and not Klingons look stupid or, something like that. So Jeff, you've already shared. Yeah.
No, they don't.
It's like we've moved past discussion of what the Klingons look like at this point, at least for this show. So, Jeff, you've already shared quite a bit, but what was your general reaction to this episode?
Wow. Great episode. I think this is my favorite episode so far. This felt more Star Trek to me than any of the other prior episodes did, regardless of what the temperature might be. I think it was a great vehicle for character and relationship building. James Frain's Sarek is friggin' fantastic. I think he does Mark Leonard really proud, honestly. And the scenes where Sonequa is playing opposite to him as Burnham were so well done and well acted and emotional. I absolutely adored them. I could just really feel the emotion and the tension between the two of them, especially in that final sickbay conversation. I just could feel that tension so well, and you could see the look on his face that he almost wanted to talk about it, but he didn't. And I think there's so many other great things about this episode. The end of the episode's a great cliffhanger. As soon as I just knew it, as soon as Lorca volunteered Kat Cornwell to be in Sarek's place at P-Talks, I just knew something wasn't going to end well for her. Mm-hmm. And yeah. I guess I walked away thinking, wow, those logic extremists sure did Sarek a favor in taking him out. But, I love that. Speaking of the Vulcan extremists, I thought that this is the kind of stuff in a prequel that I really like to see. I like to see more backstory in races that we're already really familiar with. I like the fact that Sarek's affinity for the humans kind of sparked him to make these various attempts on either his life or Burnham's life, and it's just another reference to racial purity that I didn't see coming. I mean, we've seen it from the from the Klingons, but to apply that to the Vulcans is really interesting, and it's something interesting to think about and talk about. And I guess one final point that I came to another realization watching this episode. I think that I'm finally starting to understand Tilly's greater role in the show. I initially thought she was more or less comic relief, but now I can really see that she's Burnham's personality opposite. She helps Burnham reconnect with her own humanity in a way. I think I can really see the effects of that that Tilly is having on Burnham over the course of the last couple episodes, especially this one. And I think the point that Amanda Grayson makes, giving Burnham the advice to nurture her human side, really emphasizes the drive to help Burnham kind of come back to a center and not be so Vulcan all the time. I think this episode really pushes her in that direction. I think that it made me really appreciate the Tilly role a lot more.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about Tilly at the end of the show.
Okay.
Because I think that's a pretty important relationship, especially me being the one woman voice on the show tonight. I want to take some time to focus on that. But obviously, I also really enjoyed this episode. Just really impressed overall. I love hearing the reactions from other fans and saying that the episodes continue to be more and more Star Trek, right? And this episode, although it didn't have a ton of action, it had a lot of character development that we needed, and that added a lot to the show. So I'm not going to point out specifics because we'll do that during the rest of the show. But I think we can move along into our next segment, which is Play a New Track, talking about what we learned that's new. And that was one of my points of something new, were those Vulcan logic extremists. I thought it was pretty interesting that I had always assumed it was Klingons that had bombed the Vulcan Learning Center where Michael Burnham was as a child and killed her. We know she was dead for 3 minutes at this point. But I was shocked to learn that it was Vulcan logic extremists. And I actually wound up finding... So TrekCore had actually posted either last night or earlier today a link to Memory Alpha wiki talking about the Vulcan isolationist movement that was a small 24th century faction of extreme isolationists who believed contact with alien worlds was polluting their culture and destroying Vulcan purity. So I thought that was a pretty cool connection there. They pop up in Gambit Part 1 and 2 of TNG. That was pretty obscure. So shout out there to TrekCore for picking that up. What about you guys? Tommy, were you shocked to find this out?
No, well, actually, Gambit is one of the first things I thought of because it is one of my favorite episodes of Next Generation, and it has Robin Curtis that played. Oh gosh, my memory's failing me. Kirstie Alley.
Saavik.
Yes, Saavik. Sorry about that. But she had that Vulcan, that resonator, and so anyway, when I saw that in this episode, that's what I thought of Gambit and that little cult of Vulcans from Picard's era. But I thought it was a great. I'm like you with the prequel. I like being able to see more history about these alien races that we think we know so much about, but we're learning more. And the other thing that was new was this Vulcan expeditionary force. I've never heard of that before. So I thought that, once a world came into Starfleet, their military was folded into Starfleet, kind of like what they talked about in Deep Space Nine when they were finally ready to bring Bajor in, and they said one of the biggest tasks would be, folding the Bajoran militia into Starfleet. So it was interesting to hear that there was still this other service on Vulcan that Michael Burnham and apparently Spock were wanting, or Sarek was wanting to get them into.
Yeah, had you guys heard about the Vulcan Expeditionary Group before, William?
Isn't it referenced in Enterprise at some point? Because I'm a big Enterprise fan, and I've kind of going back to what Jeff was saying about this being a prequel. This really is both a prequel and a sequel because you've got before and after to deal with, and I thought this was a great reference to the fact that there was so much strife on Vulcan during the last 2 seasons of Enterprise.
I'm trying to pop into Wikipedia because I had not heard of it before, but I'm not, I don't know everything that has ever happened in Star Trek. So let's see. The Vulcan expedition was an unspecified Starfleet mission conducted. See, that's not it. In Discovery, they refer to it as the Vulcan Expeditionary Group.
It says on Memory Alpha that there's a reference to it in Journey to Babel in TOS.
Okay. So I guess that we do have a connection there. I'd have to go back and watch that. It says when Spock was given the opportunity to join the group sometime later, he turned it down. Also for a Starfleet position, a decision which caused a rift between father and son, of course. So yeah, I'd have to go back and rewatch that episode to see if they specifically refer to it as that. But this whole introduction of the Vulcan logic extremists and the Vulcan expeditionary group, and kind of the culmination of this episode with Sarek and Burnham learning that he was faced with a choice of choosing her or choosing Spock, and as we know, chose Spock, and then Spock goes and turns it down. So I thought this was such a great tie-in between TOS and Discovery. Like it makes sense, right? Like we learned so much now about that. I guess it just adds a lot to that rift. It brings these three characters together in a way that Discovery really hadn't before.
No, this is something that I was hoping for back when we first find out about Burnham and Sarek's relationship earlier on in the series. I remember saying it, that I couldn't wait to know more about how things developed and how he wound up thrusting her into Starfleet instead of staying in Vulcan society. So I think this episode wrapped that up for me really well.
And I just have to point out, because this is what I have taken from Discovery, and I just want to make sure that I'm correct, is that Burnham never actually attended Starfleet. She went straight from the Vulcan Science Academy to the Shinzo.
I believe so. They
Okay.
say she's commissioned in.
Yep.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I was right there. I had mentioned that a while back on Twitter, and then there was like a whole no. So cool. We all have that understanding, and I am not incorrect. Yay. All right. So, William, what did you learn from this episode that you didn't know before?
Well, first of all, I thought Discovery's food synthesizer has a great motivational subroutine. I want to open my refrigerator and it says, "This is a great source of protein."
I think I'd turn it off at some point.
Yeah, but the thing that I thought was really interesting was, and I guess it's open to interpretation because it's within a Katra vision, but the idea that Burnham was able to do a mind meld with Sarek using her hands, which leads me to think that maybe Vulcans are just like live wires. You can just touch them anywhere and it starts a mind meld off of their power.
I wondered about that, and that's one of the things I thought you would mention when you were talking about, the canonistas and stuff that people would have a difficult time dealing with, was the fact that she was doing this mind meld. I'm just going to assume that because she shares Sarek's Katra, that is what is enabling her to do it, even as a human.
That could also explain the nerve pinch in the first episode, right? Because we were speculating on how she could have learned how to do that. Maybe it isn't just something that she learned. Maybe it's because there's a piece of Sarek in her that gives her some more minor Vulcan powers, because obviously it didn't last very long. And maybe that's why she needed Sarek's help with the mind meld.
Totally. And then the other thing that I'm starting to see a kind of a theme going on through different episodes is, and this leads in probably to the mirror universe, but I keep seeing mirrors and reflections as being a reoccurring theme. Look at that really great last shot of Lorca looking at his reflection in the window, and everything last week with Stamets. I just think that the visuals that they're doing with the mirrors is a really interesting, subtle reference to what's to come.
Yeah, there have been a lot of those. I mean, even as basic as, Burnham with her holographic mirror in the one episode, and then Takuma saying that Voke was a mirror. I picked up on that as well. Tommy, what about you? Did you learn anything new about the Star Trek universe from this episode?
Well, actually, in my notes, mine was the food synthesizers also. It's like the food synthesizers in this era seem to be real busybodies. I'm actually looking forward someone ordering up a fried Twinkie or something, because I can see that food synthesizer tearing them a new spore drive for that. So that was basically the new. I mean, that and the Vulcan expeditionary thing, which may not be new, but yeah, the food synthesizer deal was. I thought it was very humorous. I thought.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. And I don't know if we actually have seen them before. But the little doors that come down look just like the ones from the original series.
I don't think I noticed that.
Where the door, once the food's ready and the door opens up, that's exactly what they look like on the original Enterprise, except I don't know that they had numbers on them, but they look almost identical.
Yeah, I felt they were an interesting blend between the ones on the original Enterprise and the NX-01 in their kind of the automats that they had set up on there.
Yeah,
that's fun. I kind of, even though like I wouldn't want a computer telling me about my food, I definitely thought it brought some levity to this episode and was kind of fun. I also found out on After Trek that there's a mention of burrito in another series, and that is in Voyager. And Futures End Part 2, Tuvok, Tom Paris, and Rain Robinson, who is Sarah Silverman's character, have chili burritos for breakfast.
Oh, but they're in the past, though.
yeah. But still, it's fun. That's a fun little tidbit I learned from After Trek, which I gave that show a bit of a hard time when it first came on, but I'm finding little things like that to be valuable when I do the podcast. So good job over there. All right, Jeff, I heard that you've got a list of things to talk about.
Well, I have a few left. I mean, there's some of the things I don't want to repeat. Other people have brought them up. But one thing that we haven't really talked about learning things about the Star Trek universe and the characters is we get quite a bit more insight into Lorca. And man, he's a confusing guy. I think it's hard to really know where he's coming from now in any given situation. I mean, obviously, he's able to game the system well enough to get his captain's chair back, but he still seems to be suffering from pretty severe PTSD, judging by his reaction to Cornwell's tracing the scar on his back and then him jumping up and he keeps a phaser by his bedside, and later we see in the back of his pants all the time. So, I mean, who really is the real Lorca at this point? I mean, I think that knowing how far he went to do rescue missions before, and now turning around and letting Cornwell go, I'm going to say that he's doing it on purpose to save his own you-know-what, because she's the only one who knows, what he's really like.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think he's playing Saru because he knows that Starfleet would never risk the Discovery to rescue one person, no matter who that person is. I think that, he's made a good case for himself and his justification for wanting it to be an officially ordered rescue mission. So he's covered his tracks really well. I was trying to think of a funny way to encapsulate it, because I know we have the word badmiral for admirals gone bad. So what do we have for captains? I'm trying to think.
Mirror universe.
Oh, so you're saying we could bring the Lorca from the Mirror universe and then we have a good Lorca? No, I'm just kidding.
No, I'm saying this is the Lorca from the Mirror universe.
Oh, you think so? Mirror Lorca.
I'm like got kind of the fan theory going there. I don't want to dig too deep into it because it's an out there one. But when they're talking, when he and Kat are talking, he doesn't remember the time that she's talking about when they're watching the Perseids, and the scar on his back looks an awful lot like one of the personal agonizers.
Wow, good points. Interesting. So maybe fan theory going crazy here, but maybe jumping with the spore drive can randomly switch people between universes. Maybe we are seeing Mirror Lorca. Who knows?
Plus, Jason Isaacs did that photo shoot for Vanity Fair where there's an ISS Discovery plaque behind it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Tommy, did you have any thoughts there on Lorca?
Actually, everything that I was going to say has been said. I had a friend today that mentioned the scar looking like an agonizer scar. So I don't know. I just kind of wait and see what happens. But it's interesting. I half expected when he put her on that shuttle explode, kind of like Garrett killing Senator Vreenak, because she basically said, "I'm taking Discovery away from you as soon as I get back." And I think that's the character is so mysterious that that was my first thought, was like, oh, he's going to kill her. And then when Saru wants to launch a rescue mission, he's like, no, we'll just wait on that. And so Yeah, he's definitely interesting, and I love him. I mean, I don't know what's going on with him, whether he's a mirror or just having a bad day or whatever. But I just love his character. It's making the show interesting. I think it's great to have these characters we don't quite understand what's going on with them, rather than. And I love Next Generation, but everybody, what everybody's motivation on there was, at all times to do the right thing and whatever, which is great. But I love having this story where we're not exactly sure what's going on with some of these people. It makes it very enjoyable, I think.
Yeah, I feel a lot like this version of Star Trek is certainly the most human. Like these characters are the most realistically human characters we've seen. They're imperfect and they question themselves. They don't necessarily know what they're doing sometimes. I think it's interesting to have seen kind of an evolution of Lorca because when we first met him, I thought, oh, this guy's a bad guy. Like we're not going to like him. And a lot of us, I think, kind of went into Discovery wondering that, given Jason Isaacs' previous roles, which have generally been villains. And we had Stamets referring to him as a warmonger and all this stuff. And in this episode, I mean, over the course of the series so far, he's kind of evened out, where I've started to feel some compassion for him. He definitely, in this episode, like it really got me when she threatened to take the ship away, and he's like, don't take my ship away from me. She's all I've got. Please, I'm begging you. Which to me spoke a lot to our previous captains, like, Captain Kirk, whose Enterprise is his lady, right? But just in that moment, like his vulnerability there, you definitely see the man who is Lorca, not necessarily Captain Lorca. But I agree with everyone here that, the minute that Cornwell threatened to take his ship away, he was just like, nope, not gonna let that happen, and let me refer her for the job. So I definitely knew when that happened that something was coming. Whether she was going to be killed off or not, I wasn't sure. But I wanted to just quickly point out one thing. It's basically when Cornwell and Lorca are talking together and she's confronting him about being a different person, she points out that less than a week ago you were being tortured, now you're back in the chair. How do you feel about that? And I took note of that moment because in the history of Star Trek, generally we have an episode where someone is tortured and then we never hear about it again. Miles O'Brien is probably he's at the forefront of my mind because there really wasn't a throwback to that. Whereas with Picard, you did have some reference to when he was assimilated. But I thought it was nice for Discovery to take a moment to recognize that. But I take issue with this whole moment between Cornwell and Lorca, and it's probably because I'm a woman and we just did a shore leave episode on harassment that I felt a little awkward that he deflected her anger and her confrontation by initiating sex. And we don't have to spend the whole time talking about that. It's just something that kind of sat with me strangely, and she was all for it. So it is what it is. But I found that moment kind of creepy.
It was. But I mean, did we all pick up on the fact that she at one point had some sort of practice of either like psychotherapy or counseling?
Yeah.
So obviously she called him out on it after the fact, right? I mean, after the phaser incident in the bed, she called him out on it, and even she can't recognize, who he is and what's the true Lorca. And I think his behavior on this episode alone is extremely bipolar in a lot of different places. Like when you saw his reaction, when she touched the scar and he freaked out, and then he's begging not to take the ship away. But then he has these emotional, almost touching moments with Tyler and with Burnham, when he promotes the two of them into these positions and talks about how he wants to build this great team of people he can trust around him. And So he's very, very, high and low throughout the entire episode, more so than I think he's been in many of the previous ones. So I think it kind of fits, as awkward as it is. It seems like he's almost a master of deflection. He's got some sociopathic tendencies.
It's less his action and more so her action. Of course it's his, because I don't think you should try to break up a fight by trying to initiate sex. If that happened in my house, no, that's not going to be the end result. I just found it rather odd that she responded in the way that she did so quickly. It was just kind of an awkward, and maybe, I don't know, maybe you need to be a woman to read it that way. I don't know. But like I said, we don't need to spend a ton of time on that.
Oh, I had one more thing, by the way.
Oh, yeah, one more thing. Well, go ahead and pop in with that one last thing.
One more. Well, this is a quick one. But apparently speaking English is becoming all the rage in the new Klingon Empire since everyone's taken it up. So obviously Cole also speaks English as well. So I thought
some English.
Well, he did pretty well. Not as well as L'Rell, but he spoke well enough for us to understand him.
But he had one line that was English?
Yeah, but it was pretty well done. I mean, he would have had to practice that quite a bit to pull it off, but I'm going to assume that he's able to speak. And when we see him and Cornwell together in a future episode, I'm sure he'll be speaking English too.
Mm-hmm.
All right, conversation killer. Sorry.
Okay, all right. Let's go ahead and move on. So our last segment is Spin It Again, where we will kind of focus on the moments that stood out to us. So Tommy, what do you think? Was there anything that you kind of wanted to give some special attention to for this episode?
Well, I guess one thing, and this is small, and I don't think we've mentioned it yet, is the call out to the Constitution class starships.
Oh yeah.
When Burnham are jogging through Discovery, and getting assigned to a Constitution class starship, quote, like the Enterprise, seems to be a thing to aspire to, even though Discovery seems to be a pretty great ship itself. And in that same, with the jogging, the more you see of the design of Discovery, I love it. The way the saucer rings are connected, I kind of wondered what that was all about. And that opening shot, you see them jogging through one of those connection points, and I guess it's a window above it, which I thought was pretty awesome. But just that whole interaction between Tilly and Burnham, I love their relationship. And again, talking about the Constitution class starships, maybe we'll actually see one at some point.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot of people want to see the connect, like they want to see the Enterprise, or they want to see Spock now. So I'm curious to see what happens. William, what about you?
Yeah, well, definitely the Enterprise call out. That was a great moment. I'm absolutely loving Tilly and Michael's relationship. I think that's going to develop great over the series, and there's just a lot of potential there for her to do with Tilly what Philippa was doing with her. I think that'll be really fantastic. Kind of just echoing what was said earlier about James Frain's performance. I mean, I thought he was absolutely phenomenal on this show, and I know he's got a cult status from other shows, but I've never watched any of them, so I'm kind of new to seeing him as a performer. And I wouldn't be surprised if he got nominated for a guest star Emmy for this episode. The other thing that I thought stood out was the Vulcan Learning Center, which we've seen in past episodes, and now we finally kind of got it cleared up because we didn't know why there was a bombing there, and we know now that it was the extremists. Mm-hmm. I just find it fascinating that the production design of that is actually from the JJ universe. We've never seen anything like those bottom eggshell learning pods prior to the 2009 Star Trek. So I thought that was an interesting pull from the JJ universe.
I want to say that they were also in the animated series.
Wasn't Spock in something similar to that when he came back to life and he was relearning things and the computer's asking him a bunch of questions?
That's not in computer screen that he's standing at in really? Star Trek 4, right?
Yeah, I thought he was standing in some sort of an apparatus, but you're probably right.
No, he was just standing at a computer screen. But yeah, and I also to that point, I noticed just a lot of stuff Vulcan related in this episode had design elements from the Kelvin timeline movies. The interior of the shuttle, that I don't know what you want to call it, but like the arched interior of the shuttle looked like the I think it was the Vulcan Science Academy where they were telling Spock, "We're not admitting you from the Star Trek '09 movie." So I thought that was great because the designs in those movies, a lot of it was great. I know a lot of people don't like some of it, but there's a lot of design elements in there that make sense. So I'm glad that they brought some of that into Discovery.
Yeah, oh, I love it. I wasn't in any way criticizing it. I think it's a great production design, and I thought it was just an interesting nod to that. I'm not an expert on the animated series, so I don't know if it was featured in there. And the one other thing that stood out to me is I loved the when the the first Katra fight that they have, when he kicks her and she kind of like goes off like Doctor Strange with the ghosting version of Burnham. I just thought that was a great visual.
I was trying to go through the Wikipedia to see if I could find some information about that scene, because I thought it was in yesteryear, because there are some connections between yesteryear and the scene in 2009.
Oh yeah, the bullying scene, yeah.
Yeah, the bullying scene, but I couldn't remember specifically if we saw those in-ground pods or not, and I cannot find that there.
I know that they're doing a lot of references to the animated series, which I think is fascinating because who knows, we may see like an MRES species come along at some point.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, that would be great. And we did see Amanda give Michael the Alice in Wonderland book at her graduation. So there was a little tie-in with that there. So Jeff, what about you? Is there anything that hasn't been mentioned that you think deserves a shout out?
Yes, I had a whole bunch of stuff, and everything has been knocked out, with the exception of 2 items I have left in this one. And the first thing I'll throw out there is a moment that actually didn't happen. So we're gonna just gloss right over the whole Spore Drive tardigrade issue. It seems like Lorca's totally cool with how things are going now, so we didn't get to see that resolution whatsoever. I mean, he just seems like, well, Spore Drive's working, I'm cool with it. Stamets wants to go in there and get the needle shoved into him every time we jump. I'm totally cool with that. And he even goes so far as to just offhandedly say to Cornwell, well, he fixed the Spore Drive. Done. Well, I was anticipating last week on this show that we were going to have to re-argue this case, or Lorca was going to be bent out of shape about the tardigrade being freed. But apparently everything's cool, and I was overthinking it.
Yeah, there was some chatter online where people were, I can't wait to see what Lorca's going to say. So I'm sure that other people kind of share that question of, I wonder what his reaction was. Would have liked to have seen that.
Will Starfleet be okay with that type of a solution, or are they going to keep searching for tardigrades out there in space? And we'll have this argument down the road later on.
Yeah, maybe we'll find out in a future episode.
Yeah. So now we have potentially 3 reasons, totally valid reasons to not use the Spore Drive. 1 is if they have to use a human being to do it, and they're not cool with that. 2, they'd have to use another creature, which is kind of similar. And 3, it shifts people between universes, so they can't use it for any of those reasons. But eventually we have to have a reason why they can't use it anymore, and I'm just curious as to what that reason is going to be. And my other thing that nobody's brought up yet, and this really stood out to me as like a whoa kind of moment, was that Spock and Burnham are briefly referred to as Sarek's experiments. I thought that was fascinating, that this is how other Vulcans viewed Sarek's son and his, adopted daughter. Of course, no mention of Sybok yet, but I found it fascinating that they used the word experiments in that. It really felt like a jab from the admissions person to Sarek when he was making him make that decision between, whether Spock or Burnham would be admitted. I thought that was a pretty big standout moment. It was a little short little thing, but it seemed like a really big pointed jab to me.
If they mention Sybok, I will pop a bottle of champagne because I'm in the 5.2% of Star Trek fans who love the Final Frontier.
No, you're not alone.
I'm right here with you, man.
Yeah, I mean, it's ironic. Cybok's only pure Vulcan, and he turned out crazy. So we'll see what happens.
I thought during that one of the scenes with Sarek where I think this was before that little jab came through, but he said of Burnham, "I have created in her a being of exquisite logic to rival the best of our species."
Yep.
I thought that was just such a good line and very telling of how Sarek feels about Burnham.
Absolutely.
I thought that was pretty cool. Okay, anything else?
No, not for me.
Or is that pretty much it?
That's pretty much it. I have to reiterate what you just said, that I think this episode really did a lot to show us Burnham and Sarek's relationship, and it leaves us where we are now with it, which is an interesting place, and how they're going to resolve that relationship moving forward.
Yeah,
and whoever wins the contest for next week, I think, is going to have an awesome time, because that preview just blew me away with the idea of a time loop episode.
It's gonna be a fun one for sure. So I have to echo Jeff, and I guess we've all kind of agreed that James Frain does an excellent job of playing Sarek. I'm one of the people who've watched a ton of things he's been in. I think Gotham was one of the most recent, and I stopped watching that, but then he was in The Tudors. He's been in a lot. And when we did our first reaction to the teaser trailer that came out so long ago, I specifically said that although I was excited to see what he was going to do, and I really liked what I saw in that teaser, I'd certainly was feeling a bit of James Frain burnout. I think that this is my favorite role I've ever seen him in. So, and that just may be because I love Star Trek, right?
Possibly.
But I think he does a great job. And so, his what happened in this episode between he and Burnham was really kind of the standout overall. But before I get to my big point here, I did want to point out that we got to meet and I hope I say these Klingon names right. Danas, who is played by Claire McConnell. She's the female Klingon that we saw that has kind of the tiara headdress type thing on.
That was a pretty awesome costume, by the way.
Yeah. And then the Klingon with her, not Cole, but the other one is, I'm going to say Ujili, played by Damon Runvan, who I just started following on Twitter today because I wasn't quite sure who that was. But it was nice to see them. I know there was some confusion last week on whether that was Laurel or Danas. But now we've seen Danas, and we saw her name in the episode, so we know who that is. I really enjoyed that final interaction between Burnham and Tyler. And I won't spoil it for those who did not watch the coming attraction for next week, but there definitely seems to be a little something there between those two. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious to see what happens there, but hopefully people don't get tired of my quotes on this show, because I tend to quote a lot of it. And that's just because the writing is beautiful in Discovery, and I think it deserves special attention. But I really loved this final quote from her. Well, not final, but in that scene, she said, "All my life, the conflict inside me has been between logic and emotion, but now it's my emotions that are fighting. I think about him, Sarek, and I want to cry, but I have to smile. And I feel angry, but I want to love. And I'm hurt, but there's hope. What is this?" And Tyler says, "It's just being human." And I just have to highlight that, that's Star Trek, everybody. I continue to fight against these people who don't feel that Star Trek Discovery is Star Trek. And I get if you don't think the big picture is reflective of the Star Trek universe, but stuff like this is. And so I just feel like it needs special attention. That was a really powerful moment for me, especially that point that she's hurt, but there's hope, because Star Trek is about hope.
Yep, I agree. And I think I said at the beginning of this that I felt that this was the most Star Trek of the Discovery episodes, in my opinion, so far. And it's definitely echoed in what you just said. especially that final conversation.
Oh, I was just going to say, I agree with everything you said, Heather. I think the writers on this show are doing beautiful work, and I get offended with people that carry on about it not being Star Trek, because it is obvious from what they're writing that these people love the material. They love what they're doing, and they're just doing great work. And for me, Star Trek is more about the look. It's about the characters and the story, and we're getting that. And also, Heather, I've been following you on Twitter for a while, and I've said before, I just personally thank you for being so positive out there, because there has been so much venom and bile around the show, around the casting of Sonequa Martin Green. And I've taken offense at that because, like I said, my partner works on Walking Dead and he knows her. I was over the moon when she was cast, and then all of this negativity. And you have just been so positive in trying to push back on this ignorance, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. I try. Every now, my goal in life, my goal in podcast life is to not feed the trolls, right? At this point in the evolution of Discovery, I just no longer really want to give my energy to people who are just never going to see it, don't want to see it. And again, the majority of the time, I just tend to find that the conversations that you have, there's nothing constructive there. Like I said, it's definitely possible to have a discussion where, you talk about certain points that kind of stuck out weird and have a constructive conversation around that. And a lot of times what I see, and it's really sad, because it's not even, it's people that don't like Discovery, and it's people that do like Discovery. And what happens is that because we're on the internet for the most part, we don't have civil conversations. And it very quickly turns into insulting, name calling, measuring one's ego against someone else. And I think, above and beyond everything, for some reason, this episode has gotten a lot of pushback today, where this is Monday that we're recording. And I called out a couple people today, but primarily it's because everyone has a right to their opinion. You can dislike Star Trek Discovery. That's fine. And you can talk about it all you want on social media and on Twitter. But do me a favor and don't tag the writers, the actors, the producers, anyone involved on the show if you're just going to complain about it. And because that's not going to do anything. I know that they hear what we have to say, but this season of Discovery's wrapped. It just wrapped last week, right? So they may take our feedback and mull it over, and they may apply some of it to future seasons, but overall, don't even think about it.
Season 2 announced today.
Yeah, which great. We should have just opened with that wonderful news.
Yes.
So and that's really what it comes down to, right? Is that Star Trek Discovery has a giant fan base and a ton of support. And I would just rather talk about all of the great things that Discovery is doing instead of complaining about canon or just completely disregarding it. It's saying that the writers don't know what they're doing. Someone went as far as to call them high schoolers or something today.
Oh my God.
And I just, I cannot fathom how, and I guess this person isn't watching the show, because I cannot fathom how you can sit down and watch this episode and in any way think that the writers don't know what they're doing and are writing on a high school level or some nonsense.
Wouldn't you guys say that, given that this is the first Star Trek series in the Twitter, Facebook universe, we had it towards the end of Enterprise, I guess, but this is the most accessible the cast and crew has ever made themselves to the fans.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We don't want that to go away. I mean, they're going to stop following, they're going to stop liking if there's so much stuff being thrown at them.
Yeah, one of the people that was in this Twitter tirade, I'll call it. They actually, Anthony Rapp and Jason Isaacs both wound up popping into that discussion. And just the reality there is that the person wasn't even saying any, like they were not adding any real content to what they were saying. It just, there was nothing there. And I'm like, why do you just keep insulting people? It's just kind of beyond me. But I see a lot of positivity from people that I know. There are some people who aren't quite on board and who don't like it. But I think it's a great thing. And I understand that there are hesitations and everyone's not in love with it, but I hope that they will at least continue watching and see what happens in the end.
Well, really quickly, Heather, just let me throw out one quick thing. I want to say, in response to Tommy's comment and everything that you just said, this is why we've been podcasting together as long as we have, because, you have that positivity, and I like that we always have constructive conversations. And I think anybody who goes back and listens to any of we have 237 episodes of tricorder transmissions out there now. This is something we've always prided ourselves on, is whether it's, what we consider good Trek or bad Trek, we never go lowbrow, and we always find interesting things to talk about and positive things to talk about in Star Trek. And, it's a shame that we have so many people out on the internet now who, use that anonymity to, tag the writers and actors and say terrible things, and it's horrible. And I'm glad that we have people, in our circle here at least, and our friends online who are of the same ilk we are, and try to keep the positive conversation going. So thank you for that. And thank you for your comments. That was really nice.
Oh, you're welcome.
I think for every homophobic, racist, xenophobic, negative comment I see on social media, there are 10 more positive comments and response. And I know that at least one of the actors has listened to an episode of DiscoTrek,
yes,
which was really cool. I don't know if anybody else out there listens. I know that speaking for at least the four of us here, and so many more of our Star Trek family, that we've got your back. And
totally.
Definitely.
That, we love you. We love what everyone is doing. I think we are happy for this addition to the franchise, and we want to see you at STLV next year.
Yes, we do.
Wasn't that an incredible time having, like Wilson and Mary and Kenneth and Sam all walking around and feeling the warmth of the fan base?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I'm so glad that they came. I mean, I'm sad because I didn't get to see any of them, but they were there for the entire convention, walking around. And I tweeted today after all this drama that I really hope that the creators, cast, and crew is able to go to STLV, and STLV specifically because it's Star Trek centric. Okay.
Yes.
And so these, we are the blood of the Star Trek fan base. And sure, there are people there that don't like Discovery, but there are so many that do. And John Van Sitters had responded or said something that, they know that they're loved. They get it. But I feel like they need to come back to be reminded because with the show on air, they came before the show was out. So now with the show on air, they are constantly, especially Anthony Rapp and Wilson Cruz, fighting all this homophobia. And we have a queer community at STLV. I want them to know, we have your back.
And I told that to Wilson when he was there, and I so hope I get a chance to talk about it to Anthony, because Rend was one thing that changed my life, and the fact that both of them are now in Star Trek, it was unbelievable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hope that they make it, or some of them. I mean, I could go on all day, and we've gotten way off track with this final point, but it's a positive thing, and it's coming back to really our most positive character in Star Trek Discovery, which is Tilly. And I'm going to be totally honest, guys. I've had to adjust to Tilly because Tilly is so radically different from everyone else on the ship, and when I see Tilly, she's somewhat jarring sometimes because I'm like, oh, right, ray of sunshine and happiness. But watching this relationship between Tilly and Burnham, I think I said it was either here on DiscoTrek or Discovering Trek or Trek FM, somewhere in the podcast universe. I talked about the fact that we had Burnham and Georgiou. And so that was, a mentor relationship. We lost Georgiou, but we meet Tilly. And Jeff, I think that you and I must have listened to the same podcast today, or just you had. I assume you had this thought on your own with Tilly, kind of being a mentor to Burnham.
I did. I didn't listen to any podcast today.
Well, it did come up on. It might have been Engage, the official Star Trek podcast. It was somewhere, but it stood out to me because it's true that while Burnham is certainly a mentor for Tilly, which we saw a great deal of in this episode, Tilly is kind of helping Burnham learn how to be human again, and that connection is really neat. But I just loved, like, Tilly was talking to Burnham on the shuttle, and she's like, what's going on? Like, where's the badass lady who's always pushing me the best I can be? And these moments stick out to me because I love seeing this relationship between two women. We haven't always gotten this in Star Trek. We really haven't gotten this in Star Trek with our women characters. I love that this episode kind of came full circle, where in the beginning, Burnham is giving Tilly advice on getting her running time down and how to eventually become captain. And that's where we had that great little Enterprise shout out. And then at the end of the show, Burnham runs into Tilly running and says, stop. She's like, I gave you bad advice. There are a million ways to get to the captain's chair. Find your own. And Tilly's like, I have.
Love that.
Yep.
Such great moments. And I somewhere along the line, one of these people out there was complaining that Discovery's pushing the feminine agenda. Or some nonsense like that. And Star Trek has been great in that it has provided girls and women with really great role models, and we've seen these women connect throughout the different series, but I feel like Discovery is taking it to another level. These relationships are just extremely meaningful to me as a woman. And as someone who has, in my profession, mentored other people, it's, again, just seeing my own life reflected in Discovery. And so I find that very powerful. And I hope that other women out there watching Discovery do as well. So that is my final shout out. Is there anything else out there that you guys think we missed? Any, I don't know, canon shout outs or whatever?
I have one other thing that kind of pertains to this podcast.
Yep.
They've got shirts that say disco.
They do.
So do we, on that note. Yeah, not that I was planning to even mention that. But yeah, so side note, we did pop up our DiscoTrek logo onto Redbubble. What is it? Is our thing just Tricorder Transmissions, Jeff? Or
yeah,
Redbubble
or you can go to the
store?
tricordertransmissions.com and just click on store, and it'll take you right there.
All right, so that's our logo with the disco ball that says DiscoTrek for the podcast. But yes, the disco shirts, I've seen interesting reactions. I think for some, it kind of took them out of the episode, or it felt like additional marketing, and then everyone else just loves them. They released them last week before the episode aired. They sold out, and I think they just re-released them again. So who ordered one? Anybody?
I haven't yet, but I certainly will. I think your guys' shirt is going to be high fashion at STLV next year.
I hope so. I mean, I told Jeff to put it on Redbubble so that I can order a shirt of my own. So I'm just waiting on my 20% off coupon.
Oh, it just came out today.
Woohoo!
Check your email.
Okay, I'll have to do that. But
well, I think it also makes it relatable to people to have something that they can wear, like in a regular day-to-day place instead of a uniform. I mean, I know there are people who just wear their uniforms every day, but to have a T-shirt like that, it reminded me of when Enterprise came out. I was just starting high school, and I had an NX-01 baseball cap, which I was wearing every day because it was something you could wear out in the public and not get the weird looks if you don't want them.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to be a conversation starter because it's really not like overly Star Trek. It's just disco, and then on the sleeves, there's a little Delta shield on each one. But you can get those at StarTrek.com along with a bunch of other Discovery merchandise. But I think that this disco shirt is probably the best seller. And again, the fact that it's sold out, and I mean, who knows how many were on the website, but it's sold out. They put it back up. Just another indicator of how many people love Discovery.
Totally.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, I think we have covered everything. I can only imagine that next week's episode is going to blow this one out of the water. I've been doing polls on Twitter every week asking, which episode is your favorite. I had to knock the butcher's knife out of the running this week because it was the least popular from last week's poll. Choose Your Pain won last week, and today Lethe is ahead by like 56% is favorite episode. So after next week's episode, I'm going to have to drop out yet another one since Twitter only gives me 4 options to choose from. All right. Well, Jeff, do you want to lead us on out since you're so good at doing that?
Sure. Well, we have some unfinished business to do first. We also have some listener comments that we can go through. We have a handful of them. If you want, I can quickly go through them. And I should have chimed in before. I'm going to read the listener comments in a second. I should have chimed in before when you made the point about some people feeling like Discovery is a vehicle for feminism. My overall reaction to Discovery, I think it's the most balanced Trek series we've seen so far.
Yes.
I can't say that enough. I think this, for what it is, it's modern Trek, but I think this is the most idic Trek we've seen so far as representation of everyone.
Yeah.
So I can't stress that enough. I don't see where they're coming from with that argument because all I see is everyone getting their time in the spotlight. So I didn't want to create a whole nother conversation, but we do have some listener comments here. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 5. It looks like we have about 5 of them. The first one is from Lisa Marie. Lisa Marie says, I love this episode. The way they made Sarek, the character development of Burnham, and the reveal of Lorca's serious character problem. The bonding between the new crew members was great. I love the running scene and the replicator scene with the breakfast burritos. They gave Engineer Blondie a totally new personality. And the captain noticed, and she's talking about Stamets there. The poor Admiral, though, I felt really bad for her when she was seduced by the captain. That was so painful to watch because we know what an a-hole Lorca is. She's such a great actor, too. I thought they were going to kill her right away, but nope, it looks like we'll see her again. So there's somebody who echoed your comments from earlier, Heather.
Okay, well, yeah, I appreciate that because... And I've talked to other women about it. And, again, because Cornwell was, responded and was into it, it's hard to, you can't really question her. It's just the kind of the way that it was done was just a little off. But so, yeah, thanks, Lisa. I appreciate that.
Okay, next up is a Patreon supporter, Jocelyn Olson. Thanks for sending in your comment. She says, Sarek not speaking to Spock for so many years after he turned down his acceptance into the VSA makes so much more sense now, knowing that he was forced to pick between Michael and Spock. I love they came up with some background to that. I'm on a second watch now because I was too busy grading during the first watch. I'll have more comments later.
Yeah, she had to grade midterms. It was quite a feat. That again, just I read that comment and I was like, yeah, it really just added so much to that story. This is a story about Burnham and Sarek, but it makes so much sense, related to Spock and Sarek. A really great point.
Absolutely great point. Next up is our friend from Australia, Jamie McGregor. Great to meet you at Las Vegas this past year. I hope your sister's doing well. He says, wow, lots to digest. Halfway through, I was like, I'm not entirely sure I'm liking this. And at the end, I'm like, what happens next? So another one hooked in the land down under. Thanks for that, Jamie. Let's see, who's up next? Oh, Amy Lipstein says, this episode feels like it's finally finding its stride. Great to see the crew developing believable bonds, good Sarek backstory, interesting ideas to contemplate. So yeah, I said the same thing earlier. A lot of really interesting things in this episode to think about until next week's episode comes out. So I know I'm going to be thinking about a lot of these things. What about you guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally.
All right. And finally, Raymond Bracamontes. It was great to meet you in Vegas as well. He was one of our on-the-spot interviews in our bingo contest. So he says, I felt the same way. Good to see the crew gel and work together. It's really the first episode where Michael is likable, in my humble opinion. And Stamets was all science-y and good-humored. Finally, an episode where I can like who I'm supposed to like. Dug it big time. Not sure if I agree with the first episode Michael is likable in, but maybe I can see where he's coming from. What do you guys think?
Well, I mean, everyone has their interpretation, so
True.
whether you agree with it or not, it's his opinion.
Of course, I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying I think differently, but
yeah.
And I feel bad that there was so little Saru in this episode. We didn't get to discuss Saru at all because I love Saru.
But we did get a lot of Saru last week. So
yes.
I feel like, last week was and we did get some Lorca last week, but there was a lot of development there for Saru. And I'm sure we'll see more of him because he's just I feel like I'm like, oh, Saru's one of the standout characters. And I'm like, they're all standout characters.
They are all. I'm sorry, just an interesting note that I just saw that literally just popped up on my screen too is that somebody made the comment that this is the first episode where we saw Lorca actually sit in the captain's chair of Discovery.
Yes. Right. I noticed that when I was over on Postcards from the Edge on Trek FM with Amy Nelson, some people were mentioning that. So at the moment that I saw that, I was just like, oh, I've got to say something to Amy. So that was pretty funny. Thanks for mentioning that because I forgot. I wanted to point it out and I didn't. I have to recommend to everyone that has the time, go back and watch the episode a second time. I tweeted last night and I've talked about it, throughout our episodes that I sit down, I watch Discovery, just in front of the TV. I don't take any notes. I just watch it. And then I come back and sit down at my computer, turn on the closed captioning, go through, stop, write down like all these quotes that I read off. I write pretty extensive notes. And that's when I really fall in love with these episodes and connect with these episodes because you're giving it a second look, you're stopping to think about things, you're stopping to absorb what's going on, and then writing down this dialogue, and then you're kind of you're saying it to yourself internally. I don't know, it's just really amazing.
Totally.
If you've got time to do something like that, I recommend doing it. I wish that someone would pay me to podcast and blog about Star Trek all day because that would be my new job. But thanks to everyone for leaving comments. I'm glad that we got around to doing them today. So I will pop up the commentary post for the next episode Sunday, and we'll see if we can get around to them next week.
Yeah. Excellent. So I guess we're getting close to the end of the episode. And as we teased earlier, we're going to hear a little bit right now from Barry and Shashank about the new Polycheck show that's coming to Tricorder Transmissions in the next couple of weeks, and then we'll be back with you guys in about 45 seconds.
Polytrex. Barry DeFort and Shashank Avaru talk politics, religion, and society around the Replicator.
Along with special guests, we choose to boldly go straight into the social, political, and sometimes spiritual underpinnings at the core of Star Trek.
In this podcast, we aim to seek out new perspectives and discover the ways Trek, past and present, can help us better understand the world as it is and us as we are.
We travel at warp speed through worlds, timelines, and dimensions with one mission: make sense of our reality.
Coming soon to the Tricorder Transmissions Network.
All right, that was pretty cool. I hope you guys are all excited about it as we are. And I guess we'll go around the horn now while we're on our way out and tell the audience out there how they can get in touch with us. So, Tommy, how can people get a hold of you if they want to talk Discovery?
I have a blog called Peas peasandlonglife.com. And you can find me on Twitter at peasandlonglife.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks so much for that. And we'll have a link to that in the show notes, by the way. William, where can people find you if they want to talk Trek?
You can find me on Facebook at William Conlin, and if I can do a quick shameless plug for the upcoming documentary that I'm directing, I think it's something that a lot of sci-fi fans in general are going to be interested in. It's called Making Apes, and it's about Hollywood makeup artists who worked on Planet of the Apes 50 years ago, many of which were also involved in Star Trek. My partners with it are Tom and Barry Berman, who did the makeup for Search for Spock. We've got Werner Kepler, who did Wrath of Khan, Michael Westmore, who needs no introduction, and actors like Matt Winston, who was Daniels on Enterprise, and Lou Wagner, who was a Ferengi on TNG and Deep Space Nine. So just really a lot of great crossovers between Star Trek and Planet of the Apes and a lot of other iconic franchises. You can learn more about that at facebook.com/makingapesdocumentary.
That is awesome. Heather, I am so amazed and happy at all these projects that all of our Trek friends and guests on these shows are working on. This is really amazing.
Yeah, we've got good people in our Star Trek family. Star Trek is, man, our fan base is full of the most amazing people, and I am grateful every day for just the plethora, the variety, the diversity of people that I have met in the last, gosh, since I started going to STLV, because before then I had very few friends that were really, really into Star Trek. But it's just, Star Trek changed my life, guys.
Yeah, mine too. But I mean, even just doing DiscoTrek so far, we've had, bloggers and, group administrators and documentarians and other podcasters. And it's just, there's so much creativity out there in the Trek universe. It's just amazing to me. And I love the whole creative process, and it's amazing. I love that everyone's doing these projects. So always fun to mention them on the show and get the word out. So Heather, where can people find you if they want to talk Discovery?
I am on Twitter at LLAPosper. Please feel free to follow me. If I know you, I will follow you back, or if you engage with me a lot, I will. I tweet almost exclusively about Star Trek, and as Tommy said, it's generally super positive stuff. And then you can find me on Facebook as one of the 3 administrators alongside you, Jeff, and our great friend Jesse Akendo. It is Unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas Convention Group. Just pop that into your search bar, and if you're not a member, come join us. Look out for the DiscoTrek post and leave us a comment to be entered to potentially join us on our next show.
Awesome. And I am Warp Factor Jeff on Twitter if you're looking to talk Trek with me. And you can find all of our shows at thetricordertransmissions.com and shoreleavepodcast.com. And we are also disco_Trek on Twitter if you'd like to send your comments directly to the show. So that wraps up the 5th episode of DiscoTrek. It's been a pleasure being here with all of you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. So we'll see you next time on DiscoTrek.